So guys, hello. First of all, I'd like to ask you, can you see my screen?
Hello, yes.
Well, that's fine. So let's start. Let me close it and close this one. Well, okay, I think that's okay. So guys, welcome everyone. Hope you're doing good, you're feeling yourself good. So today we're going to talk about the dark mirror, the love of country. Like the first page will represent the love of country. Today we're examining something really uncomfortable about nationalism. Nationalism is often presented as noble, flags, and Independence Days, shared history, cultural pride. It gives belongings, it gives emotional security, and also it gives meaning in complex words. But the same emotional mechanism that produces unity can also produce, guess what? Exclusion. So this is called the dark mirror. If something is good, it has a bad side like the yin yang, white and black. The same pride that builds solidarity can, under certain pressures, turn into hostility. For example, between 19,000, 1,900, and 2,000, over 100 million people died during that period in 1 century. They all died in the large wars driven by nationalist or ideological extremism, and actually none of these conflicts began with people openly demanding violence. It's all about the government and who ran all of these things like that. They began with speeches about dignity, humiliation, honor, and survival. So in short words, nationalism becomes dangerous when people love their country, but not when people love their country, but actually when they believe it is survival requires permanent struggle. When politics is framed as existential combat, like the compromise starts to look like betrayal about the peace. So today we'll talk about the mechanics of othering, the second slide. So, belonging is actually like us and versus them, as you can see. Belonging requires boundaries. Boundaries, like, why do they require it? It's all about to define who we are. Societies often define who we are not, but this process is called othering. It being subtly stereotypes, jokes, narratives about their mentality, but after some time, the difference becomes way more dangerous. For instance, the Rwandan genocide in Africa. The Tutsis were described on radio as cockroaches, the insects. So the dehumanization reduces empathy. When empathy drops, cruelty becomes much more easier. Cruelty to nations who are those immigrants or maybe the other nations in some ethnic countries that we described in the first lecture. So, othering in simple words describes the complexity, social tensions, and the moral divisions. Once society accepts a simplified enemy image, for instance, back in the Germany during the 20th century, the main enemy of the country was Jews. The Adolf Hitler hated Jews, so he represented them as the main enemy of the country, the enemy image. And like so, policies that probably once seemed extreme begin to feel reasonable. So the psychology shift mostly happens gradually, and what begins as cultural distinction evolves into moral exclusion. And the social identity theory. The social identity theory is why your ego is tied to your flag. So, social identity theory explains why a national status feels personal. For instance, humans uh, derive self-esteem, like their identity, not only from individual success, but from group membership. For instance, as we talked in the as in the second lecture, it is something that make you feel special about your country, and why do you feel attached to your country and the connection, even if you didn't something which directly connects you to your country, but you feel like that your country, government, and you are connected to your environment by your general, like the self-shared awards and competition winnings and etc. So, like that, if your country succeeds, you feel pride. You feel very, very good, like pride. Even if you personally contributed absolutely nothing, and if your country declines something, it feels like personal humiliation. Studies show that people defend their national group even when they presented with evidence of wrongdoing, even if something has no sense for you, but for country, you will support it. Mostly it works like that when sharing propaganda and etc. And when identity is threatened, the brain reacts similarly to physical threat. So humiliation can turn into anger, and anger seeks a target. So the collective humiliation has historically been one of the strongest accelerators of nationalist aggression during the Nazi Germany and other fascist countries for Japan, Germany, and many other countries. And political leaders mostly emphasize victimhood and they activate emotional loyalty rather than rational evaluation. The political leaders is, for example, the Hirohito, the emperor of the Japan during the World War II, the Adolf Hitler, and probably the Benito Mussolini. This is the three biggest examples of our world about, and all of those three leaders, they were all fascist, Nazis. So they are the great example for our lecture today. So this emotional fusion, like when you have the image of the enemy about their nation and who are they for your country, this emotional fusion makes criticism feel like attack. You start to feel the same way as your country does. And when identity and state merge psychologically, so when you and your country are psychologically the same, share same theories, same mindset, political disagreement feels existential. Like nationalist rhetoric, like the restoring greatness. It's about restoring the greatness in that restoring greatness is like a psychological repair disguised as policy. So basically, it means that if your country shares wrong propaganda and you believe that propaganda and you both share the same mindset and opinion about that thing, about one specific thing, then you can consider yourself as a state person who supports the state and blah blah blah. But actually, you're doing what your country actually wants you to do. We can call that the success propaganda. And in groups and out of groups, the evolutionary bias and the neurosciences of empathy. So that's the continuous of the us versus them brain mindset. The humans evolved in small tribes, comparing for survival. So that evolutionary past is still in our world. It still shapes political behavior and many experiments show that even arbitrary groups and divisions, small bunch of cohorts create immediate bias if random labels produce loyalty. Imagine that the power of centuries-old identities are produced by the loyalty, and the neuroscientific research show that reduced empathetic responses that individuals view perceived outgroup members in pain. That sounds very hard, but we're going to dip to that topic. So the political propaganda exploits that this emotional distancing is like natural. Bias is natural. Like manipulating it is political, but bias is something natural about the pupil. Fear amplifies these instincts. When you fear of something, it amplifies all of your instincts and you're starting to feel that it is normal. And in times of uncertainty, societies become more receptive to narrative emphasizing threat and division. Like more unity is happening. For instance, when your environment society feels the same way about one other nation, for instance, let's imagine that you're indigenous bunch of people and you live in the American continent, and some European invaders, colonizers are coming to your land, and all of your nation, all the people of your kind start to dislike them. So that's the instinct when you feel something, like when you feel someone who is not similar to you and you see them for the first times, and it creates uncertainty. So societies become more receptive in case like this, and they have more unity in case like this. So when they have the certain threat and the certain enemy and something uncertain, which is not like them, that is like in groups and out of groups. And like that, humans evolved, and now where the globe has been trying to create more peace because it created word like global citizen. And when leaders frame politics as tribal survival, so the rational compromise actually becomes psychologically difficult because they can't be placed at the one place, same place. It would take many years of one to destroy another. We talk about that in the second lecture about the countries. For one country, new country to appear, the past country, the last country that was there must disappear. This is it. And the cultural pride, the harmless beginnings, and the foundation of identity, and the danger of identity. So, we have many steps, and the first step, the step one, is the healthy code. And first step is actually healthy, the harmless beginnings. The cultural pride, like it's about loving your language that you speak, your traditions, and history. And all of that builds cohesion and unity. Healthy patriotism is confident. For instance, you can love your culture, you can love your people, you can actually adore your history and support everything which um, has a healthy aspect for your people and your environment. And it does not panic when criticized. It has a strong shield and it coexists with curiosity and with about others. And the danger begins when pride becomes fragile. For instance, you've been loving something about your country for years, and so one day it might become kind of boring, and people decide to make it more interesting. So that's the start of dangerous thing. It becomes fragile. When it requires constant validation, like the fragile patriotism interprets disagreement as attack. Like confidence allows reflection, insecurity demands constant defense. That's the word that was being said by many like sociology professors, and it mostly explains that this is where the ladder becomes unstable. You had something stable for decades, years, your culture, like everyone was loving your culture. One thing did not change since many years. For instance, we have this pen, and this pen was standing here for many years, like for 20 years, and nothing had changed. But it became boring for your people, and your people decided to make it something more special. And by making it more special, it knew like the sense of that pen might appear like this pen is unique and we must share this pen with every country in the world, and only this pen is deserved respect and blah 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 like that. So this is where the ledger becomes unstable. When something stable that had not changed for years becomes something different. Like it's been like that for 20 years, let's imagine, but people decide to make it like that. Something changed and it made pen unstable. This is the example. So emotional insecurity transforms pride to defensiveness. When people had something stable and it changed, they try to defend it. and new mindset and everything new appears. So the perceived superiority, the escalation ladder. So this is a turning point. We are proud, like this, the word we are proud of our country becomes we are better. That's the turning point. For instance, this pen thinks that first it was like we are proud of our pen, it's really beautiful and blah blah blah. But then it turns dark, dark mirror. Then it turns into we are better. Do you feel the difference? It is more light, it is more positive, and then it becomes dark. Like they start to think that they're better because they love their own culture. So superiority creates hierarchy, like the monarchs, the empires. The hierarchy creates entitlement, and the entitlement creates resentment. When reality does not match expectations, it creates resentment. Superiority narratives mostly rely on selective history, glorifying victories while minimizing past crimes. For instance, hiding the crimes of the country. For instance, just imagine that. Let's take an example of the same pen. We had three pens right here, and one pen is the superior. It is more stronger. And inside that pen, we have another two pens, which is kind of way smaller and less powerful. So this pen started to rebelling to this pen. So this pen actually eliminates this pen, so this pen disappears and only this pen lives, and this pen becomes loyal to this pen. Yeah, that's kind of odd example, but I think it is the best way to understand it. So that pen tries to hide what this pen did to this pen, which it killed, destroyed, like that. So then in the history books, we can find that nothing about this story that this pen eliminated this pen. So actually, that is the way how many totalitarian governments are trying to hide their crimes because when they have something negative about their own country, people became more unstable. They think that our country really did such thing like that, that is really bad and blah 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 like that. So to avoid conflicts, many countries, totalitarian countries with dictatorship trying to hide their past crimes, so created memory strengthens like pride and this weakens self-awareness. They will always think that they're better and that they did not committed any crimes in their history. So during economic stagnation, perceived statuses declined, like they declined intensifies these narratives. Actually, instead of adapting to one thing, societies may double down of myths of inherent greatness. Mm. For instance, when one thing changed and people are not sure about that, they will rather look at the past in simple words. And the comparison replaces appreciation. Identity becomes a competitive rather than cooperative. For instance, we can have two nations against two pens, and one nation think that they're better, and one think that they're better than them, so they're starting to their competition. The same story happened during the Cold War between United States of America and the Soviet Union. And at this stage, moral equality weakens progressively, and this belief is universal. Dignity starts to erode and disappear. So the escalation ladder, justifying violence. Violence is never sold as aggression, but it is framed as defense. When Adolf Hitler expanded German territory, the Nazi Germany, it was justified as protecting national survival. Similar logic has appeared in multiple ethnic conflicts in many regions of our world. In the 20th century, um, in the 20th century alone, tens of millions died under state-sponsored violence, justified as national protection. And once violence becomes morally defensive by the moral, hesitation just disappears. And internal dissenters, this internal dissenters inside that, like inside the state, inside the country, are labeled traitors. So the position becomes more dangerous than the external enemy. So the moral inversion is really, really powerful. Killing becomes protection, repressions become stability. For instance, during the mid of the 20th century, we had the Joseph Stalin who made the largest repressions in the Soviet Union, and many millions of people died, and they were all shown that they're the traitors of the country, the enemy of the nation. Example is like that. And for instance, the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 and 2022 start with the fact, like with one, like in simple words, Russia start its annexion of Ukraine just because to protect its borders, because it thought that NATO is going much more deeper into Europe and it now starts to have more borders with Russia. So the same ideology, like the same story applies with what we just said a few minutes ago. Um, it's about national protection. Yes, mostly national protection. It's about the justifying violence against other countries. And the moral invasion is actually powerful. We talk about that. And at that moment, societies accept that reframing and also escalation acc accelerates very, very rapidly, very, very like fast. So, and the digital breeding ground, the radicalization in the open territory, and the algorithmically distributed. So, in the past, in the 20th century, in the past, extremist groups met in the secret. For instance, in the Brussels, in the Vienna, Adolf Hitler, the Joseph Stalin, they were all living in the Vienna, in Austria, and many other examples in Europe, in China, and in North America. And today, radicalization spreads into memes, short videos on TikTok and Instagram Reels, and online communities. So the recruitment is often begins through humor, just with simple jokes, simple screenshots, simple memes, and the irony lowers resistance. The entertainment becomes ideology. For instance, thousands of people can laugh at one meme, at one picture that they saw in the internet or in the movie, and it becomes vast. It becomes popular. So more and more people start to believe that this is funny. And if many people, like, for instance, this pen is very popular and it is a meme about one nation and blah 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 nation or country, and many other pens are starting to laugh at that. So when these pens, like, let's count it as 20 million people, and this is just one picture about one, like one meme, and this is a 20 million people. 20 million people starts to like this meme, spread this meme, post, repost it, and other, like, we had 20 millions. We had 20 million pens, and this is the half of the world, like 30 million like 30 million people. And this 30 million people saw that this 20 million people just like that meme. And because of this 20 million people, some like bunch of people, they're all different. They all has their individual mindset. They're all specific. The less, like, the which is left, like 30 million people starts to believe that this meme is actually good, and they start to like liking it without the big reason because other 20 million people liked it. This is how some memes, radicalization goes into society, and it's being justified by the meme. And not much people understand how it works, but it becomes much more easier to normalize something which was openly shared in the internet, and if some people liked it, it's easy to normalize it. So digital spaces actually remove traditional social barriers. Individuals encounter radical narratives without institutional filters. That's it. The algorithmically distributed, like, radicalization is no longer hidden. It is algorithmically distributed, optimized for engagement, and often pushing controversial content. users instantly. So we had described that in a few minutes ago in easy words. When you see something in the internet and many people likes it, it's easy for you to believe that this meme is actually good because other people liked it. And by the same method, we can share propaganda, we can shame that one nation is better than another. For instance, today we have many posts, many memes about Jews that Jews are bad, they're very smart and blah blah blah. And many people still follow all of these memes and they believe that it is all like that. And the next one is optimized for engagement and the outrage advantage. Okay. Okay, we just described that in the past. So the next one is the echo chamber, the hearing only what you like. So echo chambers eliminate friction without opposing views, beliefs, or making beliefs intensify. Repetition normalizes radical ideas. For instance, when one meme is spread into the globe, like when you see one meme for many years continuously, you start to think that it is okay. You start to normalize it because you're familiar with it, even for you have no idea what is it. So, like that, the polarization, it depends when the both sides adopt mirror image. Victim narratives and age of the group believes that it is for defending, like it's for like defending democracy while accusing the other of destroying it. About the totalitarian regimes, the dictatorship, and the isolation, mostly about isolation. And for instance, one country had isolation and it strengthens certainty, and certainty reduces curiosity. When dialogues collapses, suspicion becomes default. Democratic culture depends on disappointment without dehumanization. And the economics scapegoating, the vulnerability from instability, the damn narrative, and the emotional relief, no cure. So, what do you think about this one? Economic crisis, radical movements, and emotional relief. So, it's actually about when, mm, for instance, economic crisis increase vulnerability to extremism. Let's go deeper to that topic. For instance, during the 2008, we all know that the financial crisis happened, the biggest financial crisis in the history. Economic went down in the whole world, especially in the post-Soviet countries, and many countries experienced measurable increase in nationalist political support. For instance, one nation started to think that why they're weak because of our government, and they try to like pull out their new ideology, the new system, the new economic type, the new economic system. So like that, complex problems are reduced to simple blame, like you suffer because they are taking what is yours. In the second lecture, we talked about Catalonia and Spain. So we talked that Catalonia wants independence because it thinks that Spain taken its resources to provide poor regions with more money for their like good livings. And the same thing appears here in the economic scapegoating. And complex problems are reduced to simple blame. You suffer because they are taking what is yours, your resources, your money, and this fear demands clarity. Extremist narratives provide simple answers to complicated systems, like when economic anxiety meets identity politics, um, ethnics, and the civics, escalation becomes more likely to happen. And the echoes of 1930s. During the Great Depression, the Great Depression is the biggest economic crisis happened in the 20th century, and unemployment in Germany in the end in the whole Western world, USA and the Western Europe, unemployment in Germany and Austria approached approximately the 30%, and the economic despair combined with national humiliation, it created fertile and it grounded for radical promises. And authoritarian movements offered simplicity in times of chaos, clear enemies, clear solutions, and clear identity. By the same way, Adolf Hitler used the Great Depression as the example. After the Great Depression, we all know that he was chosen as the new leader of Germany in those periods in the 1933. He said that he will raise the country up. The Great Depression destroyed Germany, and he will be the new hero of his country. So many people believed him, and he was chosen to become the new leader of his country for the Germany. So, like that, history does not repeat mechanically, but psychologically, its patterns reappear when fear dominates political culture. About the fear is the economic crisis. Everything went really, really bad. Economy was destroyed. So, and this fear was used by the political culture, the politicians. And like that, Adolf Hitler take over the Germany, and just in 6 years, he started the World War. This is how fear, the economic crisis affects to modern politics, and the people believe that it will help them. Fear is the people, economic is the money in the country, and the politicians are just the politicians like their um, groups, their companies, and the political movements. So the totalitarian trap. We have Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt said that when identity merges completely with state, the person morality weakens and people commit harmful acts not because they are monsters, but because obedience replaces conscience and the individual becomes a function, not a thinker. So what this actually means? She described that banality of evil, like ordinary individuals committing extraordinary crimes through obedience. She warned that being alone, like loneliness, increases susceptibility to the totalitarian ideology, and the collective identity becomes the substitute for personal reasons, personal meaning, and what do each people think about one specific situation inside, like in their mind. And when then identity fuses with the state, morality shifts from is this right to is this loyal? Like becomes a function, not a thinker. In simple words, function is this right? No, the thinker is this right? Like person thinks that is this events are right? Is everything good? And the function is this loyal? Like about function about loyalty and the thinker about thinking about the problem, one specific problem. And the fascism starts. We have the Robert O. Paxton who said that it begins with rhetoric. The begins with rhetoric, then it becomes policy. By the time repression is visible, society has already adjusted psychologically. So, what this actually means? It thrives when democratic institutions appear weak. Citizens mostly trade procedural stability for decisive authority. And by the time violence becomes visible, adaptation has occurred. It actually means that extremism often enters to one door through legal pathways, and it has used democratic mechanisms to weaken democracy. The same thing happened with Hitler. He was selected legally, but then by the fascism, by his power, he started to destroy the democracy in the country, and then the totalitarian regime appeared, the fascism. And the case study 2024 and 2025 trends. So, hate speech is actually rising. Reports from Amnesty International document showed increasing digital hate campaigns. For instance, using social media against some ethnicities and blah blah blah. And institutional tolerance accelerates normalization. Like when consequences disappear, escalation speeds up. And online hostility increasingly correlates with with the offline violence. For instance, you can see one thing online which makes to believe one thing, And then it says to you that doing that thing offline is much more better. And like that, digital communication compresses your time and it mobilizes, like mobilization happens faster than institutional response. Like, for instance, you believe one thing in the internet, but before the official response of one institution, you believe that this is true and it is stuck in your brain. And the infrastructure of polarization is global and decentralized. Like, I mean that internet is the global thing and not a single country can control it like in the global level. So the defense delusion. For instance, I am the victim, not the bully. Nearly every extremist movement frames itself as defensive. For instance, the same Germany, it said that they're the victims, their country is being um, bullied by other countries. So he wants to raise up his Germany. Adolf Hitler said like that, said so. And like that, they perceived existential threat overrides like existential threat. And after some time, it overrides some frames itself as a defensive. So perceived existential threat overrides proportionally. Victimhood removes guilt. When people believe that they're the victims, they do not feel guilty. They don't feel like they're doing something wrong. They're thinking that they're doing something right to protect themselves. And like that, the existential threat narrative, the psychological inversion of roles. When one country was being bullied, the people of that country believe that they're the victims, so the victims must rise and give a lesson to their bullies. So all the psychological inversion of roles, like it just switching the roles. The victims start to think that they're right, and then the feeling of doing something right or wrong disappears, and they do something without just thinking about it. And the aggression reframes as survival. So, like that aggression appears. Yep. And so guys, the pride or prejudice. So, the key question is where is the line and who decides when it has been crossed? Actually, that's a very deep question because just when we described everything right now, and the challenge is actually not about eliminating identity. It is about preventing identity from becoming exclusionary, something dangerous. And if identity requires an enemy, it is unstable. It is mostly unstable. And strong identities tolerate diversity. And like that, the question is, do we really need identity if keeping the identity strong in our countries prevent it for the global peace? So guys, here I prepared the reading list for you. The Anatomy of Fascism and the Original of Totalitarianism. Please take screens of that. And conclusion, facing the mirror, national identity can inspire art and blah blah blah. So I will send this lecture to our chat and please write your names in our Telegram chat because we're going to finish it. Thank you all for participating in our lecture and please write your names in our Telegram group. I ask you to write your names, please, so I can write your names so you can get your certificates. This is the end of our lecture. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to write in our Telegram group.